Today we have Harry Zhang, co-founder of Lob. Lob makes APIs for companies to send letters and postcards. So Kevin has a question for you.
I'm trying to think back to when you guys applied to YC. You didn't have almost anything. I would say it was fairly embarrassing in terms of what you guys had.
I guess you could say that. I mean, honestly, we were scrambling weeks before the interview to try to come up with something that we thought was worthwhile for demoing. But I think the important thing when you're starting, a company, and for us, is thinking about the problem that you're working on versus like having a bunch of stuff. And I think for us, like we had done sort of the due diligence beforehand. We talked to a lot of customers. We had a good sense for what the core problems are, but we didn't have like the exact product just yet.
What was that MVP when you guys applied to YC at the time?
I think back and it's pretty funny just thinking about this. We literally had an API that took whatever you put into it and spit it right out to you. And that was our MVP. And we were secretly hoping.
It just mirrored the response back.
Yeah, it just mirrored the response back. And we were just sort of hoping that we wouldn't have to demo because honestly, we hadn't built a lot of product yet. We didn't know what we wanted to build. And, we've always operated from the penalties. Like we want customers to pay us for something before we actually go and do it.
What's interesting to me, as someone who's focusing on design and interfaces at YC, is that I kind of really love API companies because I think a lot of people think of it as it has no sort of interface. But to me, the interface is just documentation. It's very pure. And so I'm always interested in when I look at an API company is looking at, what are they doing here to say, this is how we want to build community around this? Because what they're trying to build out is that this is something that people who build stuff want to use. And so what are the ways they're going to communicate that this will allow them to do something sort of cool or solve a problem, et cetera. And I feel like you learn a lot about people's thought processes and also how good someone is as an engineer or programmer by how thoughtful that documentation is. I think Stripe is a classic example of this. But for you guys, I remember it's you had the basics down, but it was clear that you guys knew enough to be considered to anyone that would want to be using it, even if it was their first time ever writing any API call.
Yeah, that's definitely right. I mean, I think documentation to this day is still the number one thing. And I think we take a point in pride in making sure that our documentation is something that every single developers want to use. And I see it as friction. When your core product is an API, you better have the best documentation on the planet.
And so what was the insight you guys had early on that made you convinced that you wanted to follow this path?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it actually started from the problem, and it started from my time at Microsoft.
Okay.
So admittedly, I did not think I was going to end up in a business that's focused on mail, nor did I think that at a job at Microsoft, at a company that's 100% tech-based, one of the main things I was going to be working on was actually a direct mail campaign. So that's sort of how we initially got started with the problem, and actually started from a place of complaining. I was driving back from a ski trip with my co-founder, Lior, and I was complaining to him about this project that I was working on at Microsoft. And essentially what we were doing is we had come up with a system for sending out these very custom training materials and an invite to a webinar online. But for a number of different reasons, we weren't allowed to do that using email, and telesales was too expensive. So the thing I was doing was actually building a direct mail program that was one of the most effective things that we'd done to date. And honestly, it was a little out of, we didn't have any other options. But when it worked really well, I got a huge budget and was asked to sort of scale across a much bigger set of customers and different use cases and more products. And I thought that was going to be something that was easy, but it turned out to be the bane of my existence for the following 3 months.
In the early days, for YC, what did the API do?
Oh, yeah. The API just went into a database that, literally, I started off using my inkjet printer. We printed everything on my home printer out of my apartment. There hit a point where we were watching TV and stuffing, we had an assembly line of letters that we were stuffing ourselves. And sort of at that point, we're maybe we should go get a printer to help us with this problem.
What made you feel confident that you could just go try to sell to a company or get someone to program against that, even though it was connected to your inkjet printer? Well, what gave you the confidence? Is I'll go in here and sell someone on this fake magic.
Yeah, that's I guess for us, it was more just a belief that this was a real problem for people. So when we told them about the problem that we're solving, it really resonated with the customers that we were talking to. And I remember our very first customer. It's this guy's named William Way. last use case I'd expect for mail. He found us on our Hacker News launch. And he sent me a note saying, hey, like, I want to use your guys' letter product. Can we chat? I said, okay, William, like, tell me a little bit more about your business. And 16-year-old kid, awesome. I looked him up. I was like, very little information online. But he actually ran one of the largest Team Fortress 2 stores online. And if you don't know what Team Fortress 2 is, do you know what that is?
One of my favorite games.
Perfect. So one of the things that people like to do is they buy digital items online. Right. And that's like a regular thing because people don't want to go through all this time to like, find like the right weapon or whatever that might look like. So he had one of the largest Team Fortress 2s online. And I was still super confused. I'm like, why are you talking to me? I just didn't know. But it turns out he had a problem, which was every single time people would buy his items online, he'd deliver it. And he'd give them like the item online, but he had no proof that he actually gave them a digital item. So what he had was a ridiculously high rate of fraud, which is people would charge back and he would lose every single dispute because he couldn't show that he actually sent anything. So his solution to this problem was, I'm also just going to send him a letter in the mail with a code. And that served as his proof. But he had to do that himself and he hated that. That's something that we would have never like thought of out of the gate. But I think it goes to show, right? Like you can always think you have a way to use product, but not always.
How do you find you?
So he found us like online on Hacker News. That was like the original.
So you did like a show HN type thing?
That's right. Yeah, we did a show HN. I think that thread might still be around somewhere. But that's sort of how you found us, right? And we basically said we have an API for sending letters. And he was like, I have a problem. Like, can you guys help me with this?
And then once you got past having 16-year-olds as clients, how did you get the first like really top tier big client?
Yeah, I think for us, that top tier client's it's a big insurance company that's currently in New York. I would say they're pretty tech forward. I can't tell you the name of that company, but one of the things that's exciting that we found them was they had a problem in that they didn't have compliance and security around their existing printers. So this is in the midst of like me as a sales rep, literally sending like hundreds and thousands of emails to potential companies that I thought could be a fit. And this one got a response back, from the CEO. He asked a few sort of qualifying questions and punted me to, the guy who's actually in charge. He's now their VP of data. And they had a problem that their printer, they didn't have confidence their printer knew what like HIPAA was. They didn't know what a BA was, and they were essentially reevaluating the technology they were using to work for print shop. And that's sort of where we entered. And ultimately that became one of our first major, like real customers. And they're still a client with us today.
It's just a cold email you sent out?
It was just a cold email.
How long? Here's a question. Can you remember, like, what was in that cold email? Like, was it super short? Was it super long? Was it personalized, et cetera?
It was definitely personalized. I had a good idea of what type of mail they could be potentially sending. And it was a short, crisp email. Like, this is what we do. Here's how we're different. And I think we can help you with your current problem in these 3 ways, right? I think the key things in a cold email, you really want to hit on like,
did you know that they were having that problem?
I was going to say, like, were you clued in on the HIPAA part?
I did not know that they were having a problem at that company. We didn't know what like HIPAA was, and this was sensitive information, but like we didn't know that they were looking, right? So it was a little bit of luck.
Okay.
They were looking. We didn't know about it. We knew that they were sort of within the space that we're looking for. But honestly, in the early days, not everyone's going to be able to find you. And what's important, especially in our business as like a B2B SaaS business, is you got to find the customers that believe in the method and the methodology and how you're building the product, not just what you serve today, but also the vision of what your product could become. And that's where we found a lot of alignment, with this company, because they understood exactly why building it as an API is valuable. They're super technology forward. And while we didn't have every single capability they needed, we could cover the majority of what they wanted, and they knew that we would be able to scale with them as well.
Mm-hmm. And so once you got there, how did you start expanding that, like the other top tier clients? Was it all just cold email? Like these are big contracts, I imagine.
Yeah, these are definitely big contracts. So, today our contracts are everything from like, on the small side for our mid-markets, like $30,000 a year just to use Lob's API. And we sell contracts up to like millions a year as well. So there's a big range. But I think for us, there's a couple things. it's a sort of chicken egg problem in that like you need a lighthouse customer to get other big customers. So getting the first one is always the hardest. And that's a combination of just like combination of luck, hard work, and really understanding like your problem space and what you're solving. Once you've done that and you've successfully done that for a customer, it's much easier to take that exact same story to a similar customer and help them realize that value. And, by that point, you should also understand sort of the language of the customer, in their industry. What do they care about? What are the key problems that they have? And when you have that insight, it makes you much more credible as a potential vendor.
Like, how much time do you guys spend researching before you like reach out to, let's say you have one company, you're like, I really want to have their business. What's the prep work that you start doing? Who do you start contacting? How long does it sort of take?
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount of prep work. So, for us, it starts from just mapping out the organization, right? Drawing a blueprint of like, who are the key stakeholders in the organization, especially for larger companies. Decisions aren't made by just one individual. They're made by different folks, and each different person may have a slightly different motivation. We work with our sales reps to figure out what is that motivation for each of those individuals, who are sort of the key contacts, and what's the message that's going to resonate with them. So we'll typically start by having cold outreach to these folks. We'll also sort of combine it with a lot of our marketing tactics, in that like they're going to start seeing a lot pop up everywhere. Right. And ideally, if they're not responsive to email, we'll also look at what conferences they're going to be attending so we can actually find these folks in person. So really, it's sort of like a multi-pronged approach. It's pretty rare, and you shouldn't have expectations. Just like I send like, 10 emails, I'm going to get like 8 responses back. That's not going to happen. It's a grind. But that's part of your job, is to like work your way through that and figure out like who are the accounts that are going to work. And over time, you're going to get more and more accurate about understanding the motivation and what resonates with people and like what people care about. And you may find that like the person you thought was the person who's going to make the decision might actually be someone totally different.
Did you always know that this was going to be an enterprise company, that this would be what you'd focus on? Or was there, like, a lot of people will start an API company and they're like, anybody could use this, anybody should. And so like, how did you know where to focus? And actually, I'm kind of interested is like, what is the split in the API? I imagine most of it is enterprise usage, but how much is also SMB? How much is like consumers using it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say roughly about, 15% or so of our business is still self-service customers today. Mm-hmm. So it's a meaningful share of our revenue, and that fluctuates based on how much our big customers do. Mm-hmm. But like there is a healthy self-service segment of folks that utilize our API, and that's where we started. So for us, like, how we ended up focusing on enterprise is really sort of evaluation of like our market. And it turns out like the market that we're in today, the top, 20 players send such an enormous amount of mail that if you really want to capture the entire market, you have to focus on how you're going to win those top couple folks. And what we realize is one of the things that's really nice about an API is that like you can essentially give those same capabilities to people who aren't executing at that type of volume. So in fact, it's a focus for our business to sign these enterprise customers, but we know a lot of the features and functionality that these guys have or are looking for are also things that smaller customers want but don't have access to because they're not operating at that scale or capacity just yet. And the API enables them to get access to that.
So you guys like graduated up to enterprise.
That's right.
How long did that take?
We're still working on it now, even today. So really, it's been a 6-year journey for us. I would say we signed our first few true like enterprise accounts, just 2 years ago. So it took us almost 4 years to get there.
Yeah, so it was a while. So one thing a lot of startups don't get right is pricing. So when you guys were working your way up to enterprise, by the time you got that first big client, did you feel like you had your pricing locked down? Because if that was wrong, it could have multiplied in a bad way quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Right? We're always evaluating our pricing to make sure we have the right model. We actually made some like pretty big mistakes early on as it came to price. And I think like you guys have probably all heard the typical mistakes, right? It's like, hey, didn't price high enough. Like, we didn't start talking about pricing too late. For us, it's the structure of pricing we actually learned a lot about and was a big motivating factor in us changing our pricing model a couple years ago. So we started off thinking very much like a traditional mail provider or even someone who sells like reserve instances on AWS. Essentially, you could buy lob, and what you were buying is you would buy 100,000 letters over the course of a year. You'd pay for the 100,000 letters. You can use it whenever you want. Super logical, very easy to understand, and it worked for us for a while. But the problem we found was we went into larger customers. they don't look at, not every single budget is made equal. So when we're selling, 100,000 letters, they're going to evaluate us against 100,000 letters from another direct mail provider. And, our value is, 5 cents of that letter is going to Lob, right? That's the value that we see in our technology. But the problem is when you're talking to customers who are used to pricing in a specific methodology, they're comparing us to like, why are you 5 cents more expensive than everybody else? And they're starting to do the math, like how many more responses do I have to get? What's the higher conversion that I need to see a result? But in reality, it's two different investments, right? They're making a technology investment in the technology that we're providing them, and they're buying the mail piece. So one of the big changes that we made that was really successful in helping shift the conversations to the right level of our customers was actually creating what we call like a platform fee. So essentially now our customers pay us, $25,000, $30,000 a year to use Lob, and they get access to, our de facto like mail pricing, which is now competitive, if not lower than every single other offering. So now we can focus the conversation as like, how do you value Lob's technology? Is that worth 25 to 30,000? Instead of having a conversation about what is the cost of a mail piece and what's the conversion that we're looking for. I think it's important to differentiate and associate the value that customers see in your technology with what they pay for versus something that could be a commoditized, product in the market today.
Now, was that pricing model only an option given your maturity?
I think we could have started with that model. The reality is we just didn't know people were going to think that way. So it's hard to get everything right.
What helped you shift to that?
Well, we kept getting feedback from customers, right? And we could tell that the way that they were modeling us was they would be trying to figure out.
Apples to apples comparison.
Yeah,
it
wasn't an apples to apples comparison. That's exactly right. And the part that was challenging is like they were totally okay with like paying with like another agency to help manage their mail sends. Right. But that's not pulling out of the same budget. And like essentially part of what we offer is like we're doing that for them. But they were looking at our mail piece price and comparing it to another mail piece price. But in reality, it's the mail piece price plus whatever they were paying this other agency to manage it for them. But those were coming out two different budgets, right? So for us, we had this realization when we started talking to companies, and they kept trying to sort of ask like, oh, well, why is it more expensive? When really the reason why it's more expensive is because we're doing more things for them, right? And that's really logical, but help them understand in a model that they're used to, we had to adapt to what they've already seen in the market.
One of the things that's been interesting to me as a trend is that like software wanting to be a commodity and the value and price of it getting lower and lower. And then, API companies like sit at the very bottom of, they're like fundamental like infrastructure for services. And so, this is probably related, but how do you think about that as a business? Like, do you guys set out to be like, okay, we're going to look here to compete on price or on sort of a value, and then how can value work in an infrastructure sort of commodity like business, like an API?
And I think it's different for every single commodity, right? So, while you might be able to compare like email or SMS, I think those are priced differently than, Lob. For us, I think what we found is we wanted to be cost competitive, if not the best price in the market for the actual cost of mail, which we see as a relatively commoditized product, right? You can go to any number of commercial printers and they can produce the mail for you. So really like what's different about buying software through Lob is that you're getting access to our entire API and all the associated offerings that come with our platform by sending mail through Lob. So we want to differentiate, like, what is it that a customer is paying? We want them to know that they're getting the best price in the market for something that they see as a commodity, which is the cost of the actual mail piece. But we want them to pay us the value that they saw in using our software to send mail. So that's sort of why we made this split and having a platform fee as well as like a per piece price.
How does that adjust your sort of product roadmap to like have these technology differences that makes you different from like just a printer who can say like, hey, I can do that digital printing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for us, it goes down to a conversation on like how much are these like features worth to our customers, right? And I think over time we built different layers, like different sort of offerings, like mid-market and enterprise offering. We realized that customers would be willing to pay more for specific features.
What are some examples?
So a good example of this is like, HIPAA. One of the key considerations for companies that are more regulated spaces that they need to have a HIPAA compliant offering. Now, like it's more expensive for us to have like a HIPAA compliant offering, but we also realize like one of the key considerations when companies are looking at printers is can they meet these requirements? So we actually charge more for those customers because it costs us more, and also because there's less offerings that are able to do something like that programmatically, right? That are going to manage their customer information in a secure fashion, both in terms of how they're transitioning the information to you and transferring it to you, as well as like being stored in our system. And this is like people's names and addresses. So this is very sensitive information for a lot of companies, and it's something that they value very highly. We had customers that would be like, we'll pay you if you guys can do X for us. And that's when you really know you're onto a feature that's really important, because they can actually quantify the value that that's worth to them. And it makes it easier for us to understand and prioritize our product roadmap, because we know what customers are willing to pay for. Not just like, hey, can they achieve a slightly higher conversion of HIPAA? Now we know that like they're going to pay us an extra 10,000 and it's worth it to them because that's what they see.
And so what are the other trades that you've made in the context of like fulfilling the desires of these enterprise customers when you realize, oh, maybe they don't care about this? For example, like more vertical integration type stuff.
Yeah. So I think some examples of this is like we realized that the execution component, like being able to track your mail and having sort of the platform offering, being available through API, that was really important because a lot of companies actually are, especially larger folks, they're working with agencies that help them with a lot of the segmentation, the actual management of the campaign, the design of the mail pieces. These are things that we've thought about building products around. Make it easier for people to build beautiful mail pieces. But what we found is like most people already have that in the enterprise. They're already ready to go. Their problems are not around, the need for designing a better mail piece. They have a full service creative agency that has like 16 different campaigns and have already thought that through. So they already have it, right? So there's a good example for you.
Mm-hmm.
How many employees do you guys have at Lob? Like how big are you guys?
Yeah, we've been hiring a lot this year. So we're just shy of 70 right now.
Just shy of 70. And then don't take offense, but for an API company, I imagine it's difficult to recruit people here. And so like, what do you guys have to do? And what have you sort of figured out that helps you sort of like compete against everyone else out here in San Francisco?
I mean, I can tell you mail is not exactly the most sexy thing in the world. It's certainly not, AI.
But I love these non-sexy businesses, especially ones that make money.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, that's probably a good leg up. But I'm just wondering, like, for you guys, if you're looking for that, like, top engineer to come on and make a difference, like, how do you inspire them with a mission like this?
Good question. So a couple things that we think about. The first thing you need to do is understand the motivations for each individual that you're trying to hire. Everyone's going to care about something.
Sounds a lot like different. Your sales approach.
But it's true, right? You have to realize like what is it that people want to join a company for, and you need to identify the folks that are a good fit for where we're really strong. So for us, if you go and you ask like why some of the folks join Lob, I think the majority of folks would tell you it's around our culture, right? And that's the reason that they got inspired to join. So the mission is certainly important. And I think we spend a lot of time on talking not just about what we do today, but like what is it that we want to achieve? But ultimately, I think one of the key considerations is like, what's it going to be like to actually work at Lob? Am I going to be happy there? And that's a huge motivating factor for a lot of people. So we spend a lot of time internally thinking about, our culture. How do we sort of like find the right folks that map into the culture that we have? How do we sort of like give engineers and give potential candidates a sense for what our culture is like? And we do that through writing blogs. We do that through, having people come on site beforehand to get a sense of what it's like to be there. And we try to make sure that throughout sort of like our activities, we're tying together our core values and giving people a good representation of what it's like to work at Lob.
And so also part of this is the comp. And so before we started recording, you talked about options versus RSUs. Yeah. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. So, I think they're both good instruments.
Do you mind helping for those people who might not know? What is the difference between like an RSU and an option?
Absolutely. So one of the things commonly misunderstood is like equity compensation at companies. So RSUs and options, they're both different forms of equity that a company can offer you in a company. The main difference that we see, options essentially, you have to purchase. So there's a strike price that's associated for options. So as an employee, you have to make a decision at some point in the company's life cycle that you want to spend, your your own money to purchase shares of the company. And that's why you have essentially one option is it's the right to purchase shares at a particular price point. But the reality is, you're going to pay some relatively significant amount of money potentially in order to acquire those shares. And we've heard like people taking out loans to do this. Like there's companies designed to help people do this. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. RSUs are a little bit different. RSUs is actually a stock grant. So, there's actual value to the RSU that you're receiving, and you're not paying for the right to the RSU. You're actually being granted that RSU. So for us, at Lob, we actually decided, and I think it's a little non-traditional, that we built sort of like a unique RSU instrument that we think is sort of like the best of both worlds, right? And essentially the motivations were we want people to be invested in the company in the long term. We want to design equity compensation that didn't feel like a risk to the employee. The whole entire reason why you want equity in a company is you want a share in the upside. You want to feel like you're a part owner of the company. But if you have to spend an enormous sum of money without knowing what the outcome of the company is going to be in advance, which you can't predict, that puts you in this weird scenario where you want to buy your shares, but you're not sure if you want to. And we felt like that was a really tough position to be in as a potential candidate. So we design RSUs in a way so that, our employees actually get RSUs when you join Lob. So what that means is you don't have to make that consideration of should I spend the money to buy my options? When should I exercise that? And there's obviously some differences there, right? I think the major difference is when you get taxed. But we always looked at it as, you don't get taxed on RSUs until there's a liquidity event in this scenario, because we don't actually grant you the RSU until there is liquidity event. So therefore, you owe taxes at the time of which you probably already receive money from your RSUs. And I think, what we found is that, especially employees who understand equity compensation, that's something that's really attractive to them. And when we think about wanting people to be here for 30 years, we don't want people to stay for the wrong reasons of I don't have the money to exercise my options, I'm going to stay. I want them to stay because they enjoy the people they work with. They enjoy what we're working on or inspire the problems that we have, but we still want to give them a share and actually being an owner in the company.
And how do you handle vesting?
So it's sort of still same vesting schedule. You do a 1-year cliff, and we essentially, vest monthly thereafter. So it's the same as an option in that sense. One thing we do, we also reserve retention grants for people. So at our 2.5-year mark and every year thereafter, we continue to give people the opportunity to gain additional equity in the company. And our thought is the longer you stay at the company, the more equity you should be able to acquire. There shouldn't be a point where you ever stop earning equity in the company.
So what kind of mistakes did you guys make when it came to closing your first big sales?
Yeah. So I actually think there was a valuable lesson we learned during our early YC days. In that when you're selling your product, you're oftentimes selling some things that you might not have just yet. But I also think it's really important that you have to actually get alignment with your customer and be upfront about what you can do today, what you might be able to do in the future, and also agree on a timeline of what that looks like. Get it in writing and have that sort of be part of the close of the deal. Where we went wrong, and I sort of laughed because we built what I thought was a freaking awesome product back in the day. We actually had a mugs API. This was in our demo day slides.
Coffee mugs?
Yeah, coffee mugs. There was a point where we thought it was a brilliant idea to be able to print coffee mugs on demand through our API. We wanted to be able to print on anything. And how this happens, we had a customer who came to us and told us that they had this use case for coffee mugs. And it was a big number, a really big number for us. And, when you're small, every single, deal looks super valuable. And we were this is awesome. It would be so cool to do coffee mugs. And we built the product. So we told the customer, we can definitely do it for you. We'll have it for you 2 weeks. And we scrambled and we hustled super hard. We built a fully functioning mugs API product. But we didn't sign any paperwork for this customer. So we built this whole entire thing. We spent 2 weeks of valuable engineering time. We met the customer, Mr. Customer. We have the mugs API. Here's how you use it. And he was awesome. We'll get right on it. He went dark. He stopped responding. I was super disappointed. To this date, we sold 2 mugs through our mugs API. 2. One of them went to another YC partner, actually, Dalton. He was working at app.net, and I convinced him that he should definitely do mugs as well. And I think he put in 1 order for it, and it worked. And he was this is awesome. We killed the product a little bit shortly after, but I think it was a really valuable lesson in that you always want to be selling a little bit ahead of where you are, but you also want to align with the customer what you actually have and don't have. And that actually helped us close, one of our biggest customers to date in Booking.com. So, essentially how this opportunity came about is they were already a customer of Lob using our address verification API. And they had sort of this moment in time with GDPR where they started reevaluating all of their vendors for print. And we sort of got roped into consideration. One of the key things that was really important to them was actually like having operations in Europe. They were familiar with our API in the US. They knew it worked really well, but like they're a global company. And of course, like they want to know what our long-term plan is to support Europe and eventually Asia. So, part of the negotiation as we're working through this big deal with this customer is that we need to align with them on a timeline on how we were going to get Europe up and running for them. So for us, that's originating, letters and postcards and our other mail offerings in Europe. And that was sort of tricky, but I think we had learned some valuable lessons in that, like, we weren't going to just go and build all of Europe and scramble for potentially months at a time. But we also weren't going to tell the customer something we didn't have either. So we were pretty upfront about them, about what our capabilities look like, the timeline of which we're going to roll out. And we actually agreed to all of these things during our negotiation. So what it really helped is like our customer actually wanted to help us get things going faster, right? They're like, we want you guys to get up and running Europe like right now. And, we could actually ask for their help in building exactly what it is they want. And now it's sort of like a partnership rather than like, hey, we've oversold something. It's more about how can we work with our customer to achieve the results that we both want to get to. And I think that's really important, especially as you're talking about larger enterprise deals. You're not always going to have everything, but really sort of structuring and not overselling it, but also setting the right expectation of customers. It's difficult to navigate that sometimes, but we found as a policy, it's better to be, upfront, honest about what you can and can't do. And actually, if the customer really wants to work with you, they're going to find a way to make it work with you. And that's the best position to be in.
Are there other examples where you get a potentially incredibly high value kind of like enterprise scale client and they want something that you don't do? Do you now like kind of fish around to see if anyone else is interested in the Mugs API before you follow through with it?
Yeah, definitely. So like I think a common example of this is we're always evaluating mail format. So what I mean by that is like, you get different types of letters, all shapes and sizes. We don't support every single different mail offering today. But we have a list of like what company people have been asking for. And what we found is for us, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. We don't want to start with like a really small volume customer because it makes it difficult for us operationally. But same time, it's like we also know that this is a product people are interested in and they want to see proof points. So what we found is, we have a list of these mail format types we're constantly evaluating. When we talk to potential customers, we know here's a list that we would potentially be willing to consider. So if they can agree on a commitment level of like what they're going to send and, then we're willing to entertain some of those areas. And that's actually helped we build some products in the past before. We recently just launched, I think, earlier this week, certified mail receipts. We knew that when we launched certified mail, this is for William Way. If you guys remember, he needed certified mail. We launched certified mail, but he didn't need certified mail tracking receipts because he didn't really care like when it received. He just cared that he had a proof point.
Right.
But we knew that was something that like, we could potentially do. We chose not to do in early days because we didn't have like customers who were willing to do that en masse. So we were able to. We got a few customers that were really interested in certified mail, but felt like we were missing this one little thing in mail receipts. And we had that sort of like plan and we had thought about it. And finally, we had the right customer who come if we're willing to make that commitment level. We're already familiar with our product. We actually went and built it and we just launched that this week.
Congrats.
So the way the API works is like you guys provide this technology layer and you connect to all of the, like a network of all these printers.
That's correct.
All around the world.
That's correct.
So what I'm kind of curious about is like, you've seen this trend, especially as companies get larger and larger, where they get more vertically integrated, where they'll like want to do every step of the process so they can own it in terms of quality, but also like an R&D, et cetera. And I'm kind of curious, do you feel like, is that a thing that you guys will eventually do? Or if not, why not?
Yeah.
So for example, it's just like basically you buy a printer or you like own some printing facilities and be like, okay, great. Because like this whole like flexibility and mail format, et cetera, like part of the reason that you have to be cautious about what you go into is because you have to go and spend time to find the right partners, build out the integration, and then sort of make it work. And so I'm just kind of curious about like, is there a point in the future where Lob like owns owns like a giant printer.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that in the plan today. Is the short answer, right? Certainly, if there's a huge need, we'd consider it. But the motivation for us is like we see mail as a somewhat commoditized product. We also know that like it's a huge industry for a reason. There are hundreds of thousands of printers that are out there, but they all specialize in like slightly different things. So, for us to be good at what we do, we can't try to do everything at once. It would actually be really difficult and super capital intensive for us to buy all of the necessary hardware. And like, what if our customers need to change? We wanted that flexibility, and part of having sort of a network of folks enable us to have that flexibility. I remember in our very early days at Lob, we were still, this was pre-Lob, our pre-YC application. One of the things we want to do is we sort of just want to get our own printer. We were like, hey, it'd be nice if we could just like do it ourselves. Like, why do we need to like rely on somebody else? That's just like another place for something to go wrong.
Because you're looking at all these printers and probably like, these guys are in the Stone Age. Like we should be replacing them.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we called up an HP Indigo vendor. So if you guys don't know, HP Indigos are like the commercial print standard.
It's everyone like the Ferrari uses them. Of printers.
They're the Ferrari. Yeah, it's like this is what you want. Trust me. So we had figured this out, and honestly, we didn't know too much about like the print world at the time. So we called up the sales rep. I think the first time for him should have been like, it was weird that we were meeting in a Starbucks. We met this guy at Starbucks. We didn't have a company. We didn't have a product at the time, and we were like, we're just gonna get this printer because like we can do it better. So we start asking him all of the right questions, like, what's the, like, how are we going to do inserter? Like, what are the different formatting options? Like, we cover everything. And this guy's feeling really good about this. We're like, yeah, this guy's really smart. He knows exactly what he's talking about. We're definitely going to get this. So, and my co-founder loves negotiates. Like, so like, how much like would this cost? And he's sort of taken aback. He's like, starts immediately talking about like their leasing options. And in my head, I'm like, I don't want to lease this. I just want to buy it. Like, we're about to go get some money and we're going to raise capital. We're going to go buy this and do it. So we sort of like, corner him a little bit. We're like, all right, like how much would it cost? Like offer us a better price if we just buy outright. And I think, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like over $1 million. And I sort of looked at Leo. I was like, dude, we're not doing that. It was like no chance we're going to buy that printer. But I think, thinking about where we are today, like, maybe we do want to buy that printer, but like it immediately creates a ton of complexity in our business.
Absolutely. And that's the thing I'm always curious about. It's like Amazon could have continued using 3PL services. Yeah. But at some point they realized like we need to own and build our own warehouses to build up a certain efficiency. Like we have a vision for the future that requires us to own that technology stack. And so I'm just curious, like, at what point do you guys start to be like, oh, you know what? We're being held back by our partners.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we haven't felt that way. And our partners have been like incredible partners. And honestly, they're experts at print. They know so much more, down to like the color calibration that we should be using on all of our printers. I think the places we'd be willing to think about it is if it could give us a competitive advantage. If we're able to offer something by owning the print infrastructure, that will give us the ability to do something nobody else can. But I think that's like complex for us, right? That would be like, hey, we have a awesome hardware printing engineer who thought of a completely new way to do print. And we're going to go compete with like HP's imaging division. And we decided we can offer something that like nobody else has done. We can like do this new, method.
Oh, if someone came out on the market with like a brand new type of printer that can do offset printing like dynamically.
Like, yeah, if we could, someone could do offset printing using like digital methodology at a price point that was like not achievable in the past. I would be interested in talking to anybody who's starting that company, by the way.
The Tesla of printers.
Right.
Cool. So you guys are now 6 years old?
6 years, coming up soon.
How have you had to change as a founder and a manager over those years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the first thing, and I'm still getting comfortable with it now, is understanding that like your role as a founder is going to constantly keep changing. For some reason in the early days, I was just like, hey, I'll just like constantly be building cool product. Then I found a place where we needed somebody to go do sales. So I led the sales team for a number of years. And then all of a sudden we were doing okay on sales, but we didn't have any leads. So I started working on marketing. And I think what I found is that my role is going to continue to change. And that's something like you have to get comfortable with as like a founder, is that your role is going to change, and that's okay, because what that's essentially saying is that you guys have gotten good enough that you can hire somebody else to do that. And I think that's the expectation everyone should have when you go into business, that like you should be comfortable with every aspect. I think a lot of people like think that they can just build product forever. Everyone should talk to customers. Everyone should be going and trying to do sales in the early days, because if you, as the founder of the company, can't sell the product, nobody else is going to be able to either.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. All right. Thanks, man. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the time, guys.
Thanks, Harry.